Hello. We're going to talk about digestion. And eating is of interest to all of us. So we're going to look at the system that handles eating and the good that it does to our body. One could ask, what is digestion? What's the nitty-gritty of digestion? What's going on in this? Why do we need a digestive system? Well, the way food comes to us in fruits and vegetables and so on is not the way it can be assimilated into our bloodstream. All of those good things in food have to get into our blood to do us any good. And the nutrients in food have to be broken down into very small sizes, not just microscopic. It has to be way smaller than what is seen microscopically. It has to be broken down to molecules. The molecules that make up the most basic things are glucose, sugar, that goes through the wall of the stomach into the bloodstream, and other nutrients. So the digestive system is doing the job of breaking down all the food particles down so that they're so small that then what are called enzymes can work on a chemical basis to break them further down to very small molecules that can go into the bloodstream. Now, I suppose the Lord could have made us so that we would get the food already prepared, already digested. That's done in hospitals. They give an IV straight into a person's vein, giving them the nutrition they need, what's called total parenteral nutrition, so that it includes not only sugar for energy, but even some protein and many other things, vitamins in it. I once saw a little caricature, a little cartoon picture of a man who wasn't very happy with hospital food. He had just received his tray of hospital food, and he was sitting up in his bed with a scowl on his face, and he looked at the person, maybe the nurse who was attending him, and he said, I was on IVs. What's the chance of getting back on IV fluids? He hated the food he was getting so much he'd rather be taking IVs. But I think most of us enjoy eating if it's well prepared, and even if it's raw, we enjoy it plenty. Good apple, good berries. So we need to take a good look at what the digestive system is doing in handling this food that we put into it. We start at the mouth. There are really two aspects of digestion that start right in the mouth. One is the breakup of the food. You know, we get food in lumps or in whole items like we just mentioned, an apple or berries, and that needs to be broken down to the point where it's a liquid so that then the body in the digestive system can go into the liquid and break it further down chemically. So the first job is to pulverize, to break up these items of food, and what does that is our teeth. So our job there is to chew well. And sometimes one hears people saying, well, you should do 20 or 30 chews on one mouthful. I don't think people ever do that on a regular basis, but nevertheless, we should mention ideally what should happen in the mouth. And I don't think that giving a certain number is the best way. What should ideally happen is the food should become a cream in the mouth. You should chew to where it becomes a liquid that is smooth. And when you do that, it slips away without the person being aware of it, barely. I've done that. I certainly don't do it routinely, but I've tried it at times to just chew till I notice that it's just a cream. And it's amazing how it just slips away. So that's one aspect of the mechanical aspect of digestion. But I want to mention in that regard that if there is something liquid in our meal, by the way, it's better not to take a whole lot of liquids in our meals because they dilute the enzymes that will work on the food to break it up chemically. We don't want to dilute them too much. But let's say there is some liquid in the meal, a bit of soup, or a person is taking a bit of juice, maybe before the meal. When we do that, it is good for those liquid parts to actually take a little bit of time in your mouth. You know, you can, I guess you could chew a little bit and let the saliva mingle with it, because the saliva has other jobs other than just making the food liquid. So one saying that has emerged from this is not my own, it's from where I worked for a number of years at Uchee Pines. Somebody came up with this saying for how you should handle the food in your mouth. It was, drink your solid foods and chew your liquids. And I hope that's clear enough with what we just explained. You're going to chew your solid foods to the point where they're a cream so you can drink them as liquid, and take a little bit of time even with the liquids. One point to make here is that the only part of the long digestive system, the only part that we really enjoy or that we have any real conscious participation in a pleasant way, is the mouth. Use it to the maximum. Enjoy it the best you can. So that's another reason to chew well. I remember hearing about a doctor who did a great job of showing that you can reverse heart disease, and he did it with teaching people how to eat a diet with very low quantities of fat, and especially animal products at an absolute minimum. And you could reverse arteriosclerosis, the plugging of the arteries. And he said, actually, occasionally, maybe once in a while, you could have something that is forbidden, like a bit of chocolate. And he said, when you do that, just think about it, savor it in the mouth, take plenty of time to suck it and chew it gently. And when you do that, then if you've made it just one item, like a little piece of chocolate, that's not going to damage your whole program. Well, I would say, instead of making it something that's unwholesome, why not do that with the food that really is wholesome? With apples, with, in the vegetable line, celery and carrots. Take time to really enjoy them. When the person has done the chewing to the point that's necessary, there is something else that's going on simultaneously. And that's the other aspect that I mentioned. It's not just a mechanical breakup of the food to make it into a cream. It's that there has to be enzymes which start acting chemically on the nutrients in foods. When we say chemically, it means we're actually breaking apart the nutrients, the chemical bonds that are in them. And that starts in the mouth as well as the chewing. Saliva has in it an enzyme that breaks apart starch that is in food. Starch is a major nutrient in food. Other major nutrients would be protein. Another one would be fat. And of course, water is in lots of food. But there are all kinds of trace items in food. But here we're talking about major items. And if you think of what are starchy foods, we're talking about things like Potatoes, actually, the grains are mainly starch. Wheat, rye, oats. Actually, a lot of the vegetables are mainly starch. And starch, chemically, is one sugar unit, a glucose, tied to another, and that one tied to another, and that one tied to another. So you end up with a long chain of glucose molecules. And these can be 80, 100, or more glucose units all tied together. But the end product, when you eat that in bread or in a potato, as long as there's been no sugar added to it, when you eat it, it tastes starchy, shall we say. There's no sweetness to it. If you eat an item in which you can spend a fair amount of time chewing, and that enzyme that breaks apart starch can start working, you might be able to detect a little bit of sweetness. That can be done with a special kind of bread that is totally dried, then maybe warmed a little bit, called Zwieback, or the German for twice baked bread. You can chew it, and at the end of that, I think I've sensed a little bit of sweetness. The sweetness comes from the fact that that enzyme that breaks apart starch is going in and slicing those bonds that we mentioned are tying the glucose together. Let's say this is one glucose molecule. Here's another one. There's a bond between them. I think it'd be easier to draw it. So let's go over here. Let's say we have a glucose. I'll put a G here for glucose, tied to a next glucose. I hope this is big enough for you to see. And like I said, this can go on and on. I'm not going to be drawing it any further than these three. This goes on and on. And so the breakup of this is done by an enzyme. The word for this kind of enzyme is amylase. Amyl means starch, and the ase is the ending, the suffix that is put on these enzymes that break apart nutrients in foods. The amylase, you could say, figuratively, it's like a knife, or maybe we should even say like a chainsaw that cuts right through. It comes in here and breaks apart this bond, so that now the glucose is free. So it's interesting that the foods that we eat as starch in our mouth, down in the stomach, they're being broken up, and it even starts in the mouth. They're being broken down into a whole lot of sweet molecules. Now, like I said, this amylase, figuratively speaking, is like a knife. I'm drawing this here because I want you to keep in mind that this is a chemical process that cuts apart stuff. And that becomes especially important when we look later on in the stomach what's going to happen. This amylase is in saliva, in the mouth. It starts working there, but it especially carries on further once the food has gone down to the stomach. We already mentioned the food should be a cream. It's come down into the esophagus, and here let's see if we can draw. This is not easy for me. I'm not an artist. But we'll say here, so here we have the throat going down from the mouth. We won't try to put in where the windpipe comes there. But here the esophagus, actually it would have been further back in the neck, comes down here past the diaphragm, which runs along here, and into the stomach. Now, the esophagus is this whole stretch from the back of the mouth into what's called the pharynx, and then on down the esophagus, all the distance through the chest down to the stomach here. So we'll put here esophagus, at least we can put it ESOPH, we'll put that much there. The esophagus is muscular, so the food doesn't just fall to the stomach, it is pushed down. Because it's muscular and pushing the food down, a person actually could eat lying down, and they say that the Romans did that. They would lie down as they ate. But it's nice to have gravity help the food to go down. I prefer our way of sitting at a table and eating. We'll talk about that a little later. So we have the muscles, circular bands of muscles that are going around the esophagus and pushing the mouthful of what should be a cream all the way down to the stomach. The muscles continue all the way down, and they become somewhat stronger here where you enter the stomach. This part of the esophagus, I'm going to draw it a little bit wider, is a circular muscle that has a particular function. Circular muscles like that are called sphincters. We know of them in other parts of our body, certainly for elimination. They work for the bowels, for the bladder. And this is a sphincter whose job is, after opening up to let the food down, its main job is to keep it closed so that the food now in the stomach does not come back up into the esophagus. I'm going to put here an abbreviation, lower esophageal sphincter. Sometimes it's called the cardiac sphincter because the heart lies right here, just above the stomach. And it's right where this valve is, nearby. So the food has come into the stomach, and the next stage of digestion is to occur here. This phase of digestion is going to introduce something more than an enzyme to break up starch. It's worthwhile thinking for a moment, though, about starch in a good diet. And when we talk about a good diet, we mean an ideal diet. The ideal diet was given to mankind by God right at the beginning. When you look at that, right in the first chapter of the Bible, God gave Adam and Eve the food that would grow. The food, someone has described it as food that doesn't have a mother. Food that comes from the seeds that grow into plants and then give their fruit to mankind. So plant food is the ideal diet. And in the plant food that we eat, the most abundant nutrient usually, and not always, but usually, is starch. We already mentioned potatoes. All the grains are largely starch in their nutrient content. And so that most abundant nutrient in what is the ideal diet, being starch, the Lord put starch digestion right at the first of the digestive process up in the mouth with this amylase. For those that speak English and remember in grade school, I remember in grade school they called this ptyalin, the name of the starch enzyme that comes with the saliva. But in the stomach, you're going to start another phase of digestion, and that is the digestion of protein. Now, this raises a whole new problem because we're made of protein. When we look at each other, we're seeing protein. when we're going to digest protein, you could start digesting and destroying the very structure of the stomach. And to help avoid disaster, the Lord has made some specific mechanisms so that we don't digest our own cells. We're going to get into that. We'll show what protection there is in this most, we could say, dangerous phase of digestion. So, stay on board and we'll be talking about this next time.